After that, we ate the breakfast Kumasawa-san had made, which felt dry and tasteless. Of course, this was right after something like that had happened. No one felt particularly hungry. However, we understood logically that not eating would weaken our bodies. It would also be rude to Kumasawa-san, who had made the breakfast. Kumasawa-san had taken some unusual Western vegetables, ones that Goda-san had probably ordered for his ultra-elaborate meals, and cooked them in a Japanese style, which made them turn an unpleasant color. As to what Goda-san had been planning to cook with those ingredients, right then I couldn't even imagine it. If I did think about it, I'd be reminded of the way Goda-san died, and the sour taste would fill the inside of my mouth. Everyone pretended to eat for the time being, but of course, no one made much progress. Except Maria, right? Then we began pooling our knowledge of our current situation. First off, 6 people, which included Uncle Kraus, my dad, Kairi-san, Aunt Rosa, Goda-san, and Shanan-chan, had been found in the Rose Garden storehouse as brutally mutilated corpses. And yet we still couldn't contact the police since both the phones and the radio were unusable. So until the typhoon passed, there was nothing we could do. Furthermore, Grandfather, who we might have hoped would be able to show a little leadership in this kind of situation, had disappeared some time ago. Goda-san hadn't made breakfast, so Grandfather's stomach must have been empty. And if he had just been taking a casual walk, we should have been able to hear him whining about how hungry he was by now. And despite that, he hadn't appeared. There was more than a small chance that he'd gotten caught up in this crime. According to my aunts on their way back from Kinzo's study, they'd searched for him, calling out on every floor, but were unable to find him. Considering the timing of it all, it's only reasonable to assume that this disappearance had something to do with the crime. We figured Dad and the rest were probably killed in the dining hall, then painstakingly moved to the storehouse. So maybe Grandfather has already been killed. Or maybe he's the killer. And dragged to some strange place which we simply hadn't discovered yet. No one actually said it out loud, but this theory seemed extremely convincing. We will go check that all the windows and doors are locked. We must also conduct a thorough search for Father. The children must remain in this room. Eva-san and Hideyoshi-san, I'm sorry, but please stay here with the children. I'd like to ask you the same, Dr. Nanjo.
I understand. I will wait here.
And Natsu followed the servants, Genji-san, Kumasawa-san, and Kanon-kun out of the parlor. All that was left was Aunt Eva, Uncle Hideyoshi, Dr. Nanjo, and the 4 of his children, a total of 7 people.
Let's all stick together and maybe watch some television while we wait. Oh, I doubt we'll find anything good in the middle of the day on a Sunday.
Uncle Hideyoshi started acting cheerfully, trying to brighten up this gloomy atmosphere.
Good show. Watch it, watch it.
Oh, really? You want to watch TV, Maria-chan? Then come and watch it with your uncle.
Maria was the only one who joined in. Even though Maria had been told of her mother's death, she didn't show the slightest flicker in her emotions. Was it really normal for a 9-year-old girl like Maria to act so much like a very young child? Everyone else's mood failed to improve, and they each sank absent-mindedly into their sofas. Aniki, can I ask you something?
What is it?
Just now in the storehouse, you said something about Shanan-chan in a ring. Did you give that to her? George Aniki didn't answer, but he hung his head and closed both his eyes. There could be no clear response.
Quit it, Bowdler. Figure it out yourself.
You're right. I shouldn't have asked. That's right. It was me. Last night, I proposed to her. That was when I gave her the ring. I told her that tomorrow she should put it on whatever finger she wanted, as her answer. Guess it was a pretty pretentious thing to say. And that ring had been on the ring finger of Shanan-chan's left hand.
Well, several years ago, Shanan came to me asking for advice about you, George-san.
I wonder what she could have said.
Shanan was always really bad at lying. It was obvious pretty quickly that you were the one she was talking about. She asked whether it'd be okay for her to get close to someone, even though she was only a servant. She asked about what kinds of things boys like, what kind of clothes she should wear to make them happy. Lots of stuff like that. Well, I guess you could say I felt envious hearing her say that. So then she was given an engagement ring, and it all ended right there.
Different people valued things differently.
But being proposed to by a man, well, could be the high point of your life. So I'm sure. Last night, I'm sure Shanan was happy, from the bottom of her heart. Happier than she's ever been since the day of her birth.
George Aniki sighed deeply without raising his head. Or maybe tears had risen to his eyes. It seems Shannon was on duty in the guest house last night. But because she was too embarrassed to go back to the guest house with me, she went over to the mansion.
Think about how Shannon must have felt. When you receive an engagement ring, then no matter how much warning you've been given beforehand, it's perfectly normal to get so excited that your mind goes blank. She must have been incredibly embarrassed.
And then Shannon went to the mansion, even though she hadn't been assigned there. Helped Goto-san with his work, and got caught up in this crime. If only I hadn't given her that ring on that day, in that place, Shannon wouldn't have... Sayo wouldn't have been caught up in that crime. Ah. Aniki, that's the one place where you're wrong. It's definitely wrong. So don't cry anymore. Ah.
Peddler-kun, let's leave him be.
After Aunt Ava said that, I stopped talking to him. Misplaced words of comfort might actually do more harm than good. Jessica sat down next to Aniki and put an arm around him. Maybe only Jessica, who had known about Aniki and Shannon's love since the beginning, and who had even discussed that relationship with Shannon, could comfort Aniki now. I went over to Aunt Ava and sat down in the opposite sofa.
Peddler-kun, you really are strong. It looks like you've kept a good hold on yourself.
Ah, well, the depth of the love becomes the depth of the wound, right? After all, it's not like how that old bastard died has anything to do with me. I feel bad about Kairi-san, but, well, she wasn't actually my parent.
My. If that's so, you certainly were crying a lot back then.
Oh, well, I did think at least that much crying was due as gratitude to the parent who raised me.
The speed of that changeover and that dry tone must have come from Rudolph. That kid would always get violently happy, sad, and angry. But he'd always regain his cool immediately afterwards.
It's nothing like that. I haven't really been able to get over the shock yet. I think the only difference between me and everyone else is the kinds of emotions that stirred in me.
What do you mean?
Oh, what's this music? Oh, we get some bass. I like it. Oh. Yeah, go off. Ooh. I've been acting much calmer than George, Aniki, and Jessica. That wasn't because my sadness was any less intense, or because I'd already recovered. My sadness was simply getting replaced gradually with a different emotion. Rather than sad, I'd say I'm more pissed off. What bastard did this and where? It's kind of been eating at me that I didn't get a chance to smack him upside the face. That was what I really wanted to do. I couldn't forgive myself if I just sat there, overwhelmed with sadness and hugging my knees. Since the time Dad and the others were killed, this island has been covered by the typhoon. Which means the bastard responsible for all this is still somewhere on this island.
Yes, that would seem to be the case. I wonder if they're hiding somewhere in that dark forest even now.
I felt like I'd had a very similar conversation with Kairi-san the night before. That's right. After the letter from the person claiming to be Beatrice appeared at the dinner table last night, we talked about whether or not a 19th person actually exists. Aunt Ava, do you think this murder has anything to do with the letter from Beatrice last night?
Ah, that one. Well, I wonder. All of the siblings agreed that the mysterious letter was sent to further complicate the problem of father's inheritance. As to whether that and the case this morning are related, it's impossible to tell at this stage.
Was that letter really given to Maria by some witch named called Beatrice?
How could it be? All of it was a farce devised by father, wasn't it? He made Shannon-chan or someone wear the dress from the portrait and trick Maria-chan, right? Isn't that just the kind of overly intricate prank father would pull?
Last night I talked with Kairi-san about whether Beatrice actually exists. And Kairi-san also said that Beatrice was probably one of the 18 of us.
Isn't that obvious? There's no one else on this island besides us, right? Then there must be someone amongst us who's pretending to be Beatrice. There's no one else but us on this island, you think? Obviously, right? Are you saying there could be someone else here other than us? No one is on this island except us. There are only 18 people. So the one pretending to be Beatrice has to be one of those 18.
Kairi-san denied the existence of a 19th person by spinning the chessboard around. Even though Aunt Ava hadn't constructed an argument that complicated, her opinion at least was the same. Except if that's the case, our situation starts to look very ugly. At the time of Beatrice's letter, the whole thing could be passed off as a prank set up by someone or another. However, if we're assuming there's no 19th person, we can't ignore this anymore. In other words, if there is no 19th person, then the culprit who killed Dad and the others is also one of the 18, right? So in other words, the person who killed them is one of the people inside this very mansion right now. Aunt Ava smiled meaningfully. It looked like she thought this conclusion should have been obvious from the very beginning. The culprit carried the bodies of those 6 into the storehouse. But even that was an impressive feat, don't you think? That shutter is always closed and locked, right? In other words, in order to carry them into the storehouse, the culprit would need to unlock the shutter. Understand? Is it possible the shutter was left open by mistake that day? The servant said it's always kept locked. In other words, unless the culprit took the keys from the servant room, there's no way they could have opened the storehouse. I wonder if the key in the servant room was the only one. Genji-san said that was the case, which means the culprit knew where that single key was kept and took it. Just now I watched when Kanan-kun returned the key to the servant room. The wall was packed with keys, and I don't think a novice would know where or what those keys went to. The culprit was miraculously able to find the storehouse key among all of those. Furthermore, even though the key didn't have a tag or anything sticking to it, they knew it was the key to the storehouse behind the rose garden. And that means they also knew where the storehouse was. I'll say it even clearer. The culprit knew the inside of the servant room well. Her argument was extremely plain and clear. If the bodies had been found thrown somewhere in the bushes of the rose garden, there wouldn't have been much to go on. However, if there was only one key to the storehouse in the servant room, and it was stored with such a large group of keys, a novice would not be able to tell them apart. This means the culprit was someone who went into the servant room a lot, was familiar with the locations of the keys. The family members didn't normally go into the servant room, which meant that one of the servants is the culprit. I'm sorry, but even I can't tell you any more than that. However, I'll tell you one thing. What's that? It's reasonable to think that the culprits, are multiple in number and fairly well armed. They'd have to be, wouldn't they? They had to assault the 4 in the dining hall and kill them, drag a total of 6 bodies all the way to the storehouse beyond the rose garden, and arrange for the disgusting makeup and the graffiti on the shutter. There's no way that a single culprit could carry out all that on their own, right? It made sense. It probably would have been possible for a single person with enough time, but it would take so incredibly long. It was probably safe to assume that a significant number of people were involved. So what you're saying is that whoa. Was that maybe all of the servants were in cahoots? Please keep it quiet, okay? It wouldn't be right to voice mere speculation like this. And if it really is true, what would you do next? They might not let us leave here alive. This is an opponent who had no trouble killing Nissan and 3 others. Right now, the only ones I can count on to fight with me are the 3 in my family, and maybe you, which comes to a total of 4 people, right? We're no better off than they were last night. In short, it'd be easy for the culprits to massacre the rest of us. I've been playing detective with Aunt Ava, trying to expose the person who had killed Dad and the rest of the people before the police did. If only I could clearly penetrate the culprit's identity and stick the proof in their face. I'd been so sure that, just like in one of those detective movies, the culprit would then give up and surrender. However, the culprit would only surrender if there was no way for them to fight back. The culprits behind the crime in this island were far from helpless. They might even be able to massacre all of the remaining people here. And on top of that, this island was like a giant closed room, cut off from the outside world by the typhoon. So they had a full day until tomorrow to kill, scheme, and camouflage themselves. In short, it wasn't a safe atmosphere where we could get very far by playing detective. To the contrary, we were at a stage where we had to be scared stiff, since playing detective might displease the culprits and cause them to commit another mass murder. Well, it is just a possibility, right? But I can't bring myself to trust the servants yet. And that doesn't mean I only suspect them. Don't you think there might be some mastermind behind all of this? A mastermind? Why do you say that? It's just a feeling. Think about what the word servant literally means. It means someone who serves as someone else's arms and legs, right? It was a bunch of Ushiromiya family members who got killed. So naturally there must be someone involved who stands to gain from that result. This was also plain and clear. The Ushiromiya family head had been right in the middle of the discussions about how to distribute the inheritance when grandfather died. The case followed the standard form of any classic mystery novel. The crime was definitely caused by someone with ties to the Ushiromiya family who was involved in the inheritance problem. Aunt Ava had probably read a few books in that genre herself. Her argument may have had a few blind assumptions in it, but it was a standard conclusion that anyone might have reached. I think most people would end up suspecting the servants, even if they used different reasoning to get there. Especially the story about the key to the shutter. That made it very easy to suspect that one of the servants was involved. And that's why I don't like it. What do you mean you don't like it? Nah, just talking to myself. I tried to dodge her question by joking, but I couldn't erase the sense of unease welling up inside me. After all, her conclusion was such an easy one to reach. A conclusion that anyone could reach. And I just couldn't be satisfied with that. Like it's clearly not the obvious answer. Because clearly this killer, they would have to think ahead, right? There's no way they would let they would have to throw the obvious answer to throw them off the trail. If I tried spinning the chessboard around like I learned from Kairi-san, this is exactly why a servant couldn't possibly be the culprit, because it'd be too obvious. If the servants really were the culprits, they wouldn't hide the bodies in a place connected to themselves. Yep. Why on earth would they use a rose garden shed if they were the ones in charge of the key that could unlock it? The police would probably immediately pursue whoever had been in control of the key. It was even possible that some of the other facts might come to light as a result. The more we think of the servants as culprits, the less reason they had to carry the bodies into the storehouse. But what if they knew we'd think that, put the corpses in the storehouse for that very reason? No, it's completely impossible. When the police come and inspect the scene of the crime, they'll probably be able to uncover many things. No matter how carefully the culprits carried out that murder, some traces will definitely be found. In other words, they had everything to lose and nothing to gain. If you think about it this way and look at this murder game from the culprit side, it's hard to imagine why they'd want to call attention to the corpses. Once the corpses were found, it could result in someone sending a report to the police, or it might make the remaining people more cautious, or it might make the survivors start to search for the culprit. None of these things would make life any easier for the culprit. It's just like the words of the main character's mother in a novel I read recently called Higurashi no Nakakara ni. Oh yeah? Yeah. Nice shameless plug. Every story needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Eliminating that beginning is essential for the perfect crime. Right now, we don't know where Grandfather is. We don't know if he's already become a victim, or if he's one of the culprits. But this state of confusion must be beneficial to the killer. The culprit has absolutely nothing to gain by showing us the bodies in such an obvious way and making us all realize there's been a murder. In fact, this is the perfect place to spin the chessboard around. In other words, showing us the corpses in such a flashy way must be the culprit's goal in and of itself. So at the very least, to the culprit, the appearance of 6 corpses there meant more than the deaths themselves. Yes. It's almost like it's part of that whole prophecy thing, huh? In other words, the culprit wanted this murder on display. To whom? To us. This is a message. The culprit's trying to shove something in our faces. I don't know what it is. At this point in time, this vulgar mass murder isn't making me feel anything except a malice directed towards all of us. Malice towards all of us. Is it? Each one of the survivors has some kind of connection to one of the 6 victims. Uncle Krause's death brought Jessica the grief of losing a family member. The deaths of Dad and Kairi-san brought me sorrow, while Aunt Rose's death brought Maria sorrow. Did it? Goto-san's death probably shocked his fellow servants, and Shannon-chan's death brought grief both to George Aniki, who had proposed to her, and Kanen-kun, who had loved her like an older sister. Everyone now on this island has received an equal amount of sadness. Aunt Ava was sure that the servants were in cahoots. But then, how could you explain the deaths of Goto-san and Shannon-chan? At any rate, by this argument, the grief caused by the 6 deaths hit everyone but Aunt Ava and Uncle Hideyoshi. And then, tearing apart the 2 that were, what was the direct quote? 1 second. Those who remain shall tear apart the 2 who are close. Yeah, meaning that I think everyone that's left is going to look at Ava and Hideyoshi and be like, no one died that was close to you, what the fuck? Why do you get to be all okay? And they're going to fucking, once again, don't know if it means literally or in a metaphorical sense, tear apart. Who knows? Someone's getting fucking torn apart, though. Even Aunt Ava, who had directed suspicion at the servants, had acted as though she herself was beyond suspicion. Could not be ruled out as a suspect. In the first place, she was able to argue that the servants were suspicious by focusing on the shutter's key. But if you look at it from a perspective of motive, who would gain, Aunt Ava's name rises to the top of the list. I know what you're thinking, Badler-kun. Huh? Oh no, please don't tell anybody about how my head's so full of obscene stuff. I'm the one who's going to gain the most from these murders. Since I'm going to be suspected anyway, I might as well get it out in the open. I tried to dodge the issue by joking around, but apparently it didn't work. The inheritance will be divided into as many parts as there are siblings, but right now I'm the only one of the 4 left. Oh fuck, I just realized that. I'm not even just... I didn't stop to think that, oh yeah, Natsuhi is a spouse. She's not, you know, one of the people. And then yeah, Rudolph, so yeah, Kraus, Rudolph, and Rosa were the only 3 siblings. Okay, goddamn. That just fucking hit me. Like, yeah, Ava's the only sibling left. All of the assets of the Ushirome family will become mine. If Uncle Hideyoshi heard you, he'd say, could you give it a rest? It's not funny. I'm sorry. I was just fooling around, since I'm going to be suspected anyway, no matter how much I try to smooth it over. That's why, from my point of view, this murder might have been designed to cast suspicion on me. Unfortunately, my alibi for last night is weak. Could you tell me a bit more about last night? As you know, the discussion between the siblings of how to slice up and eat the inheritance continued until late into the night. But I don't know how late it lasted. My husband and I had woken up early that morning. We were so sleepy and a little past midnight they let us go. We then returned to the guest house and rested there. Yes, yes. You left earlier. Can anyone other than Uncle Hideyoshi prove that? No, wait. It's not like I suspect you or anything, okay? Oh, are you sure about that? I don't know if it counts as proof, but when we returned to the guest house, we were greeted by Genji-san, who asked if we needed a towel. I think that should be enough to prove we returned to the guest house a little after midnight. Though, if my theory was correct, the servants could all be in cahoots, and that wouldn't actually make for much of an alibi. Heh, you've got a point there. Guess that means I'm playing detective with the real culprit right now, huh? However, let me say this for my honor's sake. If I was after the inheritance, I'd never commit such a bizarre set of murders. After all, if I just wanted to make them forfeit their rights to the inheritance, it wouldn't matter to me how they died. It'd be much smarter of me to try and make their deaths look like accidents. Especially if you're assuming I laid out some careful plan that involved even the servants. You've got a point there. If you're killing someone for personal gain, you definitely shouldn't make it look like a murder. Exactly. That's why I'm in such a blue mood. The police will probably treat me like the mastermind and investigate all sorts of things. Not fun at all. Aunt Ava shrugged with a bitter smile. It was just as easy to suspect Aunt Ava as it was to suspect the servants. So if we spin the chessboard around, oh my god, how many times am I going to hear that fucking phrase? Does that make it impossible for the culprit to be her, suspicious as she is? However, if that sort of argument always works, then motive can never help us anyway. No, that can't be right. Knowing the motive must give us powerful clues towards knowing the culprit. That's why murderers from all time periods disguise crimes in complicated ways, cleverly preventing their motives from being discovered. I don't get it. I just don't get it. Every time I spin the chessboard around, it keeps flipping from front to back and back to front. Are my thoughts bringing me closer to the truth? Or are they... Oh? Or are they? Go on, don't leave me hanging.